A group of college students are being woken up by guards, banging on their cell doors, made to stand at attention, made to recite their numbers, not their names. One of them starts crying. He's been here for 36 hours. He is not in prison. He's in a basement. The guards are students too. The prison is made of filing cabinets and wooden boards. And at any point, technically, he could stand up, say the words, "I quit the experiment," and walk out into the California sunshine. He does not do this. He asked to go back to his cell. And that is the moment Philip Zimbardo should have stopped everything. He did not. Welcome to FreeCell Lab, passive visualization while we ask the only question that actually matters. Is your life an experiment? And if it is, are you the scientist or the subject? Philip was born in 1933 in South Bronx, New York City. He grew up poor, grew up surrounded by institutions, hospitals, prisons, systems of authority that processed people and produced outcomes that had nothing to do with those people who were actually there. He watched this as a kid, and it stuck with him. Philip Zimbardo genuinely cared. He was a prison reformer at heart. He wanted to understand why prisons were so brutal, not to defend the brutality, but to dismantle it. He believed the cruelty wasn't coming from the people inside. Maybe it was coming from the system itself. Was that belief wrong? By 1971, Philip was a professor of psychology at Stanford University, respected, published, genuinely brilliant. He had read Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, which we haven't covered here yet. And I promise you, it's worth the wait. It is so interesting. And he wanted to extend that line of inquiry into something even more. Milgram studied how authority figures affect individual behavior. Philip wanted to study something bigger. What happens when you put people inside an entire system of authority? Not one person giving orders, a whole institution, a whole role structure, a whole environment. What does it do to otherwise normal people? He decided to build a prison and find out. In a basement at Stanford. Philip advertised in the local newspapers, the Palo Alto Times, the Stanford Daily. The ad read, "Male college students needed for a psychology study of a prison life. $15 a day for 1 or 2 weeks." In 1971, $15 a day was a reasonable money for a college student. 75 people responded. Philip and his team screened them carefully. They were looking for normal. No history of violence, no criminal records, no psychological disorders, no drug problems. They picked 24. Then they flipped a coin. Heads, you're a guard. Tails, you're a prisoner. Simple as that. Now here is where I just want to pause because I think this is actually an important thing to consider. We have the hindsight. They screened for obvious things, but they didn't really know what to look for. They didn't ask whether any of these young men had shown sadistic tendencies as children. Did any of them have a history of cruelty? Did any of them have authoritarian personalities? Or were they raised in those type of homes as well? Did any of them have trauma histories that might affect how they respond to confinement? They checked the obvious boxes and flipped a coin, which means from the very beginning they were building a study on a foundation with significant unknown variables, and this will come up again later when we explore that a little deeper. Philip converted the basement of Stanford Psychology Building into a mock prison. He did not just move furniture around. He built it. Actual cells made from filing cabinets, wooden boards with real barred doors. A solitary confinement space they called the hole. It was a small dark closet. A guard station with an observation window. Bare concrete walls. It felt genuinely institutional. The guards got uniforms, khaki shirts, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses. The sunglasses were Philip's idea. He wanted to prevent eye contact between guards and prisoners. No eye contact means no human recognition. No recognition means no empathy. No empathy means, well, we'll see. The prisoners got smocks, like hospital gowns, with identification numbers on them. No personal clothing, no personal names, just numbers. They had chains placed around their ankles. Not heavy chains, just enough to be felt consistently. A physical reminder 24 hours a day that their freedom had been taken. On the morning the experiment began, actual Palo Alto police officers, real ones, with real squad cars, drove to the homes of the participants assigned as prisoners and arrested them, handcuffed them in front of their neighbors, drove them to the actual police station for booking, then transferred them to the Stanford basement prison. Philip wanted the psychological impact of the arrest to be real. He got what he wanted. Day 1 was relatively quiet, tense, but manageable. The guards were figuring out their roles. The prisoners were still processing the reality of what they signed up for. Day 2 was when everything changed. The prisoners rebelled. They took off their numbers, pushed their beds against the cell door, shouted at the guards. It was spontaneous, disorganized, and very human, I think. The guards panicked. Philip had not given them detailed protocol for handling rebellion. He told them to maintain order, not to use physical violence. Beyond that, figure it out. So they did. They used fire extinguishers to force the prisoners away from the door. They stripped the prisoners of their smocks. They took their mattresses. They invented arbitrary rules on the spot. Stand at attention when a guard walks by. Recite your number on demand. Do push-ups as punishment for infractions. More push-ups. More push-ups. They created a privileged cell, better food, mattresses back, slightly more comfort for prisoners who complied. They used it to divide the group, set the prisoners against each other. By day 3, one prisoner was having a genuine breakdown, crying uncontrollably, hyperventilating, showing what appeared to be acute psychological distress. Philip brought in a priest and a lawyer to talk to the prisoners to add to the realism. And the prisoner, being evaluated, asked the priest to help him get out. Philip let him go, but he kept the experiment running. Over the following days, the guards escalated. Sleep deprivation became a standard tool, waking prisoners at 2:30 a.m. for counts, forcing them to stand in the dark for hours. Guards made prisoners clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. They forced stress positions. They played psychological games, pitting prisoner against prisoner, making them believe informants were among them. 3 more prisoners broke down and had to be released early. The ones who remained became, in the words of researchers who reviewed the footage decades later, increasingly passive, defeated. They stopped using their names. They referred to themselves by their numbers. One prisoner, when offered release pending a medical review, went through the evaluation and then asked to go back to his cell. He had been in the experiment for less than a week. He chose the cell. The Stanford Prison Experiment proved that ordinary people become cruel when given power over others. Situational forces, not individual character, determine behavior. Put a good person in a bad system, and the system wins. This is the textbook version. It has been in introductory psychology courses for over 50 years. It has been cited in legal cases, policy debates, and corporate training programs. It was made into not 1, but 2 featured films. And in 2018, when researchers were finally given full access to the original archive material from the experiment, the recordings, the notes, the participant interviews, they found something that changed the entire picture. And that's what I want to focus on here. The guards were actually coached, not subtly, on tape. In one recording, a member of Philip's research team, David Jaffa, played the role of warden. He meets privately with a guard who's not being cruel enough. The guard is doing his job at maintaining basic human decency, and David Jaffa tells him, and I want to quote because the words I think matter. We noticed this morning that you weren't really lending a hand, but we want to get you active and involved because the guards have to know that every guard is going to be what we call a tough guard. The guard pushes back multiple times. He doesn't want to be a tough guard. He doesn't feel comfortable with it. The research team keeps pushing. By the end of the recording, the guard has been persuaded. He becomes one of the more aggressive guards in the experiment. He was coached into it. There's more. The most famous moment of the entire Stanford Prison Experiment, the prisoner who screamed hysterically, "I'm burning up inside, I want out now." The prisoner, Douglas Corpy, was interviewed decades later. He said, and again, I want to be precise, anybody who is a clinician would know that I was faking. I'm not that good at acting. I mean, I think I do a fairly good job, but I'm more hysterical than psychotic. He was faking. He wanted to leave the experiment and had been told the only way out was a medical or psychiatric emergency, so he performed one. The most dramatic breakdown in the most famous prison experiment in the history of psychology was an act. And then there was Dave, the guard, who became the most aggressive, who used an accent he didn't actually have, who pushed the hardest and punished most severely. When interviewed years later, he said he had viewed the entire experiment as, his words, a kind of improv exercise. He based his performance on the film Cool Hand Luke. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. The Stanford Prison Experiment was partially inspired by a Paul Newman movie from 1967. This did not appear in Philip's methodology section. Whoops, I guess he forgot to include that in the notes. And here's the part that makes the whole thing genuinely fascinating. I think rather than just ethically troubling, Philip gave himself a role in the experiment. He was not only the researcher, he was the prison superintendent. He had an office, a clipboard, he wore those dark glasses. And somewhere between day 1 and day 6, Philip stopped being a scientist observing a system and became a character inside it. When a prisoner tried to escape, Philip's first instinct was not, "Interesting data point, let me observe what happens." His first instinct was to stop the escape. He coordinated with other researchers to prevent it. He thought like a superintendent. He talked about the prisoners as though they were real threats. In his own words, written later, "I was surprised that I had internalized my role as superintendent to the extent that I did." He was surprised. A psychologist who designed an experiment specifically to study how people get absorbed into institutional roles was himself absorbed into an institutional role and didn't notice until someone pointed it out, which means the experiment was contaminated from the inside before the first prisoner ever walked through the door. The person whose job was to observe and remain objective was neither observing nor remaining objective. He was participating, he was influencing, he was in a very real sense one of his own subject. The researcher became the experiment, and nobody noticed it for 3 decades. Christina Maslach, she had just finished her PhD at Stanford. Philip had been her dissertation advisor. They had recently, finally, after 3 years of professional restraint on his part, became a couple. She was 32 days into being his girlfriend. On day 5 of the experiment, she came to observe. She had not been watching it develop day by day, the way Philip's core team had. She walked in fresh, and her stomach reacted before her brain did. She felt physically ill watching a guard march prisoners with bags over their heads down a hallway to the bathroom. She watched Philip watching this. He was taking notes. She pulled him aside. She said, according to the account of that conversation, "It's terrible what you are doing to these boys. How can you see what I'm seeing and not care about suffering?" Philip, by his own account, didn't understand at first what she was reacting to. He was so deep inside the superintendent role, and he genuinely could not see what she was seeing. The thing she walked in fresh and saw immediately, these are real people in real distress inside a fake prison, had become invisible to him. They had, by multiple accounts, a significant argument that night. Of all the researchers who had come through the Stanford basement that week, and others had come, had watched, had nodded approvingly at the realism, Christina Maslach was the only one who objected. One person out of all of them. She's the reason the Stanford Prison Experiment lasted 6 days instead of 14. Without her, we will never know what day 8 looks like, or day 11, or day 14, or how it would look when the prisoners actually walked out of the cell because the experiment was over. Without her, Philip Zimbardo keeps being the superintendent and forgets entirely that he's supposed to be a scientist. She stopped it. She married him the following year. And she spent the rest of her career researching occupational burnout. What happens to people when the systems they work inside slowly consume their capacity to feel? Which, if you think about what she watched happen to Philip in that basement, is not a coincidence. The scientific community has had a complicated relationship with the Stanford Prison Experiment for over 50 years. Initially, it was celebrated, cited everywhere, used to argue for prison reform, which was genuinely important work and genuinely needed. The experiment's conclusion that situations shape behavior more than individual character became one of the foundational claims of social psychology. Then the cracks started showing. Critics pointed out early that the self-selection problem was significant. People who signed up for the study, advertised as a simulation of prison life, were not a neutral sample of humanity. They were specifically interested in power, authority, and confinement. In 2018, analysis actually found that participants who scored higher on certain personality traits were more likely to volunteer for the guard role. The coin flip assigned them randomly, but the pool the coin was flipped in was not random. Then came the 2018 re-examination. Researchers published a detailed analysis of the archive material and concluded that the experiment's core claim that ordinary people naturally and spontaneously become cruel when placed in power was not supported by the actual evidence. The cruelty wasn't spontaneous. It was coached. It was performed. It was shaped by a research team that needed the experiment to produce the results it was designed to prove. One guard, John Mark, told researchers that Philip, he went out of his way to create tension, and that Philip knew what he wanted and then tried to shape the experiment by how it was constructed and how it played out to fit the conclusion that he had already worked out. Philip pushed back on all of this, of course. He maintained that the experiment's findings were genuine, that the coaching was minimal, that the cruelty that emerged was real, that the prisoner breakdowns, even the ones that turned out to be performed, reflected genuine psychological pressure. He's not entirely wrong. This is really complex. There were real moments of real distress. Some guards did become genuinely cruel without being asked to. The system did produce real psychological effects on people in real time. But the clean conclusion, people became tyrants under power, full stop, does not survive contact with the evidence. The truth is messier, and messier, as we have established on this channel, is always more interesting. So why does this happen? Why do we slide into roles so completely? Why did Philip lose himself in the superintendent character? Why did guards perform cruelty? Why did prisoners accept confinement in a fake prison rather than simply walk out? So my guess is, for most of human evolutionary history, your survival depended entirely on reading authority correctly and performing the expected roles within it. Tribal structures, hierarchies, religious institutions, military systems, family systems, every one of them ran on the same basic code. Know your role, perform it. Do not deviate in ways that threaten the structure. Deviation from expected roles, especially in high-stakes authority situations, was dangerous. It could get you excluded, punished, sometimes killed. Outcast. So your brain evolved in an extraordinary capacity to detect what role a situation demands and perform it automatically, to read the room at a neurological level, to become the character the system expects before you've consciously decided to. Is this biologically brilliant or a brain bug? It has kept our ancestors alive in complex social hierarchies for tens of thousands of years. The ability to read power structures accurately and navigate them fluidly is one of the reasons humans succeeded as social species. But the system cannot tell the difference between a real authority structure and a performed one. It cannot distinguish between a genuine institutional role and a 2-week experiment in a basement. It reads the uniform, the sunglasses, the cell door, the numbers on the smock, and it starts running the program automatically without asking whether the authority is legitimate or the role is real. Philip designed an environment so psychologically convincing that his subjects' brains responded to it as though it were real. The uniforms were real enough. The cell doors were real enough. The arrest was real enough. And the brain, doing exactly what he evolved to do, completed the picture. The guards became guards. The prisoners became prisoners. And Philip became the superintendent because that's what the room said everyone was. The Stanford Prison Experiment may not have proven what Philip said it proved. The mythology was compromised. The coaching undermines the conclusion. The replication problems are real. But the question it was asking is still one of the most important questions in psychology. How much of who you are in a given situation is actually you? And how much of it is the role the situation assigned you before you walked in the door? It doesn't require a uniform and mirrored sunglasses. It requires context, a set of implicit expectations, a room with rules you didn't write but someone already knew. Philip's experiment was flawed. His conclusions were overstated. His mythology would not survive modern ethical review for 10 minutes. But the thing he was pointing out, the way systems consume the people inside of them, that thing is real. Christina Maslach spent the next 30 years studying it under a different name. She called it burnout. Next time you feel yourself falling into a role that you didn't choose, take a minute to ground yourself. Feel the earth beneath your feet, the chair you're sitting on, the bed you're lying on, the toilet seat if you're on the pot. Feel where you actually are. The role you're playing right now in whatever your room you're in or system you're part of, is that actually you? Or is that what the room decided you were before you got a chance to introduce yourself? Next time you notice yourself performing a version of yourself that doesn't quite feel like you, you'll know what Philip found in that basement, and you'll know what Christina Maslach saw when she walked in fresh. Next time we open the file on an experiment that asked a completely different question, not whether people perform roles, but whether people see what's actually in front of them, or only what they're looking for. A group of researchers asked people to watch a basketball game and count the passes. 35% of them missed the gorilla. What gorilla? And it's so good. It's going to be so good. Hit subscribe so you don't miss that one, and drop a comment. What role are you playing right now that might not actually be you? See you in the next experiment.